Hi, my name is Troy Parfit, and I'm the author of The Devil and His Due, How Jordan Peterson Plagiarizes Adolf Hitler. In today's episode, I'm going to try to answer the question, is the Jordan Peterson phenomenon a cult? To do that, I will need to list and describe cult criteria, and then evaluate whether Peterson meets these criteria. First, cults typically require a charismatic leader, and it seems that from the perspective of Jordan Peterson's fans, he meets that criterion. They seem to find him mesmerizing. They often comment on his high IQ, possibly because he tells them that he has a high IQ, and when they describe him, they reach for words like brilliant and wisdom, and note that he appears confident and inspires confidence. I should add that I don't find Peterson charismatic. I think the register of his rhetoric is metallic and its substance tactless and divisive. As for his writing, I don't see much charisma there either. Furthermore, he is the worst teacher I have ever seen. To call his lectures disjointed or unusual barely hints at the scope of the problem. However, his fans clearly disagree. So do some of his critics. For example, Vox Day, who wrote a book about Peterson called Jordanetics, which I recommend, says, quote, "Not since Adolf Hitler has there been a more artfully practiced public speaker," end quote. Another characteristic of a cult is that the leader thinks they're a visionary, messiah, or prophet, and that they're on some kind of mission. Peterson definitely ticks this box. In his first book, Maps of Meaning, he says that in his early 20s, he had over 105 dreams about nuclear explosions that were so vivid and frightening that he was often afraid to go to sleep. He also says that he thought about nuclear annihilation every waking minute of every single day. Around the same time, he experienced a psychological split. He heard an admonishing voice, accompanied by a pair of eyes that watched or regulated his speech. To appease the voice with the eyes, he had to change the way he spoke so he could stop feeling split or disintegrated and get into alignment. As a student of psychology, he had the unfailing urge to stab his classmates in the back of the neck with his pen. Dressed in a cape and cowboy boots, he visited a maximum security penitentiary and realized he was just like the homicidal inmates. He could commit the crimes they had, he just hadn't. Peterson learned that two of the inmates had tied or held another inmate down and pulverized his leg with a lead pipe. He wondered if he could tie or hold someone down and pulverize their leg with a lead pipe. He concentrated on this task for days, concluding that he could turn someone's leg into sausage with ease. How he found time for this thought experiment while constantly focusing on nuclear war, I'm uncertain. After Peterson's split, he concluded his dreams were primarily religious and trying to tell him something, and he embarked on a quest. But not voluntarily, he was being compelled by some kind of force. In 12 Rules for Life, he conveys a vision he had of soaring over pyramids as though he were the Egyptian falcon god Horus. Indeed, he talks about visions and prophecies often, and as I document in The Devil and His Due, he has repeatedly identified as a savior. This is noteworthy because in 12 Rules for Life he labels mass murderers who commit suicide saviors, and he has emphasized to his students that the Germans in the Third Reich saw Hitler as their savior. In 2018, Peterson's former friend and colleague at the University of Toronto, Bernard Schiff, submitted an article to the Toronto Star called "I was Jordan Peterson's strongest supporter. Now I think he's dangerous." Therein, Schiff recounts a strange telephone conversation he had with Peterson. He says, "And then," Jordan said, with the intensity he is now famous for, "Bernie, Tammy had a dream, and sometimes her dreams are prophetic. She dreamed that it was 5 minutes to midnight." Schiff goes on, "That was our last conversation. He was playing out the idea that appeared in his first book. The social order is coming apart. We are on the edge of chaos. He is the prophet. Jordan would be our savior." I think he believes that. Another sign of a cult is that the leader creates a hierarchy where only they can be at the top. The paradigm is aspirational in nature. That is, followers are encouraged to aspire to reach the top, but they never can, because the pinnacle is occupied by the leader. Jordan Peterson's aspirational paradigm is the dominance hierarchy. It has 10 levels, and he has said that his fans, or lobsters, are mostly at the base of this structure, trundling about the murky chaos, whereas he is at the acme. The lobsters need to become individuals who take responsibility and so on, thereby attempting to claw their way to the top, which, as I've said, is impossible because Peterson has stated that the figure at the top of the dominance hierarchy is him. He has further said that the dominance hierarchy takes the form of an Egyptian pyramid, over which there floats the all-seeing eye of Horus, the Egyptian falcon god. Here's Peterson in 12 Rules for Life, describing his vision. "I had a vision once of an immense landscape spread for miles out to the horizon before me. I was high in the air, granted a bird's eye view. Everywhere I could see great stratified multi-story pyramids of glass, all akin to modern skyscrapers, all full of people striving to reach each pyramid's very pinnacle. Here we see Peterson identifying as Horus, who, remember, is a god. There's another figure at the top of Jordan Peterson's pyramid, Adolf Hitler. Here's Peterson praising Hitler at the University of Harvard. Quote, Hitler climbed up the ranks of the hierarchy in a remarkable manner, end quote. And who should heed their leader's advice so they can climb the ranks of the hierarchy? Peterson's lobsters. Now here's Peterson at the University of Toronto. It's like the elevation of the person at the top of the dominance hierarchy to the status of some kind of quasi-deity. It certainly happened in Hitler's case. And then the brutal murderousness that can emerge from that. Those are pictures from the concentration camps at the end of World War II. Just to be clear, before showing images of dead and emaciated Jews, Peterson compared Hitler to, quote, some kind of quasi-deity, end quote, indicating that he was godlike. Cult leaders are invariably authoritarians. The first thing I noticed about Jordan Peterson was that he had the personality of a dictator and was patently anti-democratic. He claims that his views represent the truth, and that other people's views are just wrong. Indeed, shouting the word wrong has become one of Peterson's trademarks. He often engages in a logical fallacy known as appeal to authority. For example, since I have a PhD or am an expert, I am correct. Indeed, just by claiming to be an expert, he violates appeal to authority. Like a black hole drifting through the ether and sucking up light, he dominates discussions, seldom allows for questions, and bristles at criticism. When disapproval comes from women, he can become intimidating, for example by glaring or gritting his teeth. In a dominance hierarchy, there can be no equality. However, there is certainly domination, and therefore exploitation. Dogma drips down. The lobsters are happy with being told so-called facts, which always serve the interests of the leader. Peterson never encourages his fans to read widely or think critically, and he has called group discussion during lectures, quote-unquote, dangerous. In other words, democracy is dangerous, because in democracy there exists a multiplicity of views. This is one of the reasons why Peterson is always slamming postmodernism, which he equates to communism, a belief that someone could only hold if they knew nothing about postmodernism, which is intimately bound up with democracy, a cult leader's enemy. Speaking of enemies, cult leaders foster a mentality of us versus them. Peterson tells his lobsters that they are individuals who need to avoid groups like the radical leftists and the neo-Marxists. Of course, when you're a crustacean moping about the dominance hierarchy's base, or level 1, it mightn't occur to you that you're in a group, let alone a cult. I'm inclined to think of the scene from Monty Python's Life of Brian, when Brian is trying to explain to a throng of people who think he's the Messiah and have followed him home that they're mistaken. From his window, he yells, "You don't need to follow me. You don't need to follow anybody. You've got to think for yourselves. You're all individuals." To which the crowd shouts back in unison, "Yes, we're all individuals." Peterson's enemies have become his individuals' enemies. Kindergarten and elementary school teachers, most of whom are probably caring, intelligent, and hardworking women, curriculum writers, centrists, liberals, women, advocates for human rights, more women, political activists, environmentalists, lawmakers, the Canadian government, small d Democrats, the Frankfurt School, and various Jewish intellectuals. If he added me as an enemy tomorrow, claiming that I'm reprehensible or pathological, his followers would quickly imitate him. And this brings us to another hallmark of a cult. The leader molds their followers into a protective shield, or paramilitary, or actual military, as did Hitler. Cult leaders are typically grandiose narcissists who create a false persona, for example, that of a strong man, wise man, or quasi-deity, in order to protect themselves from the ugly truth that they are weak and pathetic and gravely mentally ill. By brainwashing pliable acolytes, they provide themselves with even more protection. Why expend energy defending yourself and attacking your critics when a legion of lobsters will do it for you? Here's Peterson talking about the power he could exercise, if he so wished, over his barmy lobster army. Quote, "If I wanted to sick my internet trolls on Channel 4 News, then there would be nothing but broken windows and riots. Right." End quote. By Channel 4 News, he had in mind Kathy Newman, the impetuous female journalist who had the nerve to ask him challenging questions. You see, after Kathy interviewed Jordan, she received so much online abuse from his misogynistic followers that Channel 4 News felt the need to call in extra security. The final distinguishing feature of a cult that I wish to discuss is that the leaders' stated aims and beliefs are not their actual aims or beliefs, which is to say they conceal their true motivations and intentions behind a veil of dictums and lies. Take, for instance, the occultist Aleister Crowley, whose chief symbol was an Egyptian pyramid which contained the all-seeing eye of Horus. Working-class converts signed on with Aleister Crowley, presumably to study magic or the dark arts, but the leader hoped to drive them to despair or suicide through a regimen of abuse. His cult was actually a death cult. Many cults are death cults. To put it mildly, Peterson's two main stated aims, that he wants people to improve by becoming individuals who get their lives in order while staying away from the far right, are rather at odds with the evidence I've found of him plagiarizing Adolf Hitler. Again, this evidence is documented in The Devil and His Due. I'd like to close with a description I found of Peterson giving one of his public lectures. Quote, "A sorry lack of education, conceit that bordered on madness, a very mediocre intelligence, combined with the hysteric's cunning and power fantasies of an adolescent, were written all over this demagogue's face. His gesticulations were all put on, devised by a hysterical mind intent on only making an impression. He behaved like a man living in his own biography, in this case as the somber, demonic man of iron of popular fiction, the ideal of an infantile public whose knowledge of the world is derived from the deified world of trashy films. This hysteric and transparent impostor strutted about on a stage, encountering only slight and ineffective opposition. It is difficult to understand how his ranting speeches, delivered in shrill, grating, womanish tones, could make such an impression on his followers." Actually, the person who wrote this was Carl Jung, and he was describing Adolf Hitler. Jordan Peterson has praised Carl Jung for starting a cult. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe.